My husband cheated with his mistress. I get revenge by exposing his $250,000 scam that cost. While I lay unconscious after surgery, my husband brought his pregnant girlfriend to my hospital room. His mother said, "Maybe she'll die and solve our problem." I heard everything. When I woke up, the nurses had already set something shocking in motion. Someone was reading my medical chart who shouldn't have access to it. "Look at this," a young female voice said, papers rustling beside my bed. "It says here, the surgery was more complicated than expected. Internal bleeding, extended time under anesthesia." Internal bleeding. My surgery had been routine gallbladder removal. I'd spoken to my surgeon before the procedure, and he'd assured me it was straightforward, minimal risk. So why was this stranger discussing complications that hadn't existed when I'd signed the consent forms? "That's good for us," Joshua replied, and something in his tone made my blood pressure spike despite the sedatives coursing through my system. Good for them. Medical complications were good for them. Before we continue with this story, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe that women deserve protection from financial predators who exploit trust and vulnerability, please consider subscribing. It helps us share these important stories with others who need to hear them. Now, let's see what I discovered next. I forced my breathing to remain steady, keeping my eyes closed as footsteps moved closer to my bed. The familiar sound of Joshua's leather shoes mixed with the softer click of heels I didn't recognize. My husband of 8 years was in my hospital room with another woman, discussing my medical condition like it was some kind of business transaction. Rebecca mentioned someone was asking questions about insurance policies yesterday. The female voice continued detailed questions about payout procedures and beneficiary claims. My nurse Rebecca had seemed nervous earlier, fidgeting with my foreline and checking my chart multiple times. I'd assumed it was normal post-surgical monitoring, but now her behavior made terrible sense. Someone had been pumping her for information about my financial details while I lay unconscious and vulnerable. "How much does she know?" Joshua asked. "Nothing. I made sure of that. But she's suspicious about the timing. She kept asking why family members needed information about insurance procedures before the patient had even recovered." Family members, plural. My mind raced as I tried to identify this woman's voice. It wasn't his sister, wasn't his cousin. This was someone I'd never heard before. Yet, she spoke with the casual familiarity of someone who belonged in Joshua's inner circle. The bed shifted slightly as someone sat down beside me. I recognized Joshua's cologne, the same expensive brand I'd bought him for our anniversary 6 months ago. His hand touched my forehead, a gesture that should have been comforting, but now felt calculating. "The surgeon said she might experience memory issues from the extended anesthesia," he said quietly. "That could work in our favor." Memory issues. I tried to recall my conversation with Dr. Martinez before surgery. He'd mentioned no such risks. "Standard procedure," he'd said, "outpatient surgery, home the same day." So why had I been unconscious for what felt like hours? And why was Joshua discussing memory loss like it was part of some plan? "Are you sure she can't hear us?" the woman asked. "Look at her. She's completely out. The medications they gave her would knock out a horse." But I could hear everything. Every whispered word, every rustling paper, every footstep around my bed. The anesthesia was wearing off faster than they realized, and my insurance investigator training was kicking in automatically. 8 years of detecting fraud and analyzing suspicious claims had taught me to notice details that others missed. The door opened with its familiar squeak, and I heard the soft-soled shoes of medical staff entering. But instead of the usual cheerful greetings my nurses had been giving me, there was tension in the air. "Mr. Martinez, I need to speak with you outside." Rebecca's voice was firm, professional. "We're having a private family moment," Joshua replied, his tone shifting to the charming voice he used with strangers. "It's important. Hospital policy requires that I discuss some concerns with the patient's husband." My heart rate monitor must have betrayed something because Rebecca moved quickly to my side, adjusting something on my foreline. Her fingers brushed my wrist, and I felt her check my pulse manually, her touch lingering longer than necessary. "The patient's vitals are showing some irregularities," she announced. "I need everyone except immediate family to step outside." "Chelsea is family," Joshua said firmly. Finally, a name for the voice that had been discussing my medical complications and insurance policies. But who was Chelsea? And why did Joshua consider her family when I'd never heard her name before? Hospital records show only spouse and parents as approved family members, Rebecca replied, and I could hear the steel in her voice. Everyone else needs to wait in the family lounge. There was a moment of tense silence before I heard the click of heels moving toward the door. Chelsea wasn't happy about being dismissed, but she was leaving. The door closed with a soft thud. Your wife's surgery took longer than expected, Rebecca said to Joshua, but her voice was different now, more careful. There were some complications that the surgeon needed to address. Complications that didn't exist. I was certain now that something was very wrong with my medical records, and Rebecca was trying to figure out what was happening just as much as I was. What kind of complications? Joshua asked, and I caught something in his voice. Not concern, curiosity, like he was gathering information rather than worrying about his wife's health. Internal bleeding that required additional procedures. The anesthesia time was extended significantly, and there may be some temporary cognitive effects. There had been no internal bleeding. I remembered the surgery clearly until the anesthesia took hold, and Dr. Martinez had said everything looked routine. But Rebecca was creating a narrative, and I began to suspect she was protecting me from something I didn't yet understand. How temporary, Joshua pressed. Memory issues, confusion, difficulty processing information could last days or weeks, depending on how her body responds to the trauma. Rebecca was giving Joshua exactly what he seemed to want to hear, that I would be confused, vulnerable, and unable to understand what was happening around me. But why would my own husband want me incapacitated? The door opened again, and I heard multiple footsteps entering. The energy in the room shifted dramatically as more people arrived. How is she? An older woman's voice, sharp and impatient. Megan, Joshua's mother, with her distinctive nasal tone and the way she always got straight to the point without pleasantries. But there was something different in her voice today, an edge I'd never heard before. Still unconscious, Joshua replied. The surgery was more complicated than expected. Good, Megan said, and that single word made my stomach drop. Maybe she'll die and solve our problem. The words hit me like ice water. Joshua's mother, the woman who'd smiled at me across countless dinner tables, who'd hugged me at Christmas morning, who'd called me daughter for 8 years, had just wished for my death as a convenient solution to some problem I didn't even know existed. Mom, Joshua said, but his tone wasn't shocked or horrified. It was cautionary, like he was warning her to be more careful with her words rather than disagreeing with the sentiment. What? I'm just saying what we're all thinking. This whole situation would be so much easier if we didn't have to deal with her. Deal with me like I was an obstacle rather than a human being. Like my existence was inconveniencing their plans. The insurance money would cover everything. Chelsea's voice came from near the window. She'd returned despite Rebecca's instructions, and now she was discussing my life insurance policy like I was already dead. Insurance money. My mind clicked into investigator mode, analyzing the conversation with professional detachment despite the personal horror of what I was hearing. They were discussing my death as a financial opportunity, talking about insurance payouts while I lay supposedly unconscious just feet away. Rebecca is getting suspicious, Joshua said quietly. She's asking too many questions about who has access to medical information. Then we need to be more careful, Megan replied. But this surgery was perfect timing. No one questions complications during medical procedures. Perfect timing. They had been planning something, and my gallbladder surgery had provided them with an opportunity I was only beginning to understand. The routine procedure I'd scheduled months ago had somehow become part of their scheme. What about the house? Chelsea asked. Already handled. The paperwork was signed before the surgery. Paperwork? What paperwork? I own my grandmother's house outright, inherited it free and clear when she passed 5 years ago. Joshua had no legal claim to that property, and I'd never signed any documents giving him ownership or borrowing rights. But as I lay there listening to them plan my financial destruction, I realized that my signature could be forged, especially if I was unconscious and supposedly suffering from memory issues. If I appeared confused and vulnerable, who would question Joshua's claims about legal documents or financial decisions? The full scope of their betrayal was becoming clear, and it went far beyond a simple affair. This was systematic, calculated, and had been in motion long before I'd ever felt the first pain in my side that led to this surgery. They weren't just planning to replace me, they were planning to erase me entirely, taking everything I'd worked for and inherited, while making my death look like a tragic but convenient accident that solved all their problems and funded their new life together. I lay perfectly still, controlling my breathing and heart rate, while the three people I trusted most in the world discussed the best ways to destroy everything I'd built and inherited from the grandmother who'd raised me to be strong, independent, and never let anyone take what was rightfully mine. They had no idea that I could hear every word and that every syllable was being burned into my memory with the precision of someone who'd spent years documenting fraud and building cases against people who thought they were smarter than the system. The moment they left my room that first night, I knew I couldn't wake up yet, not when I'd just uncovered the tip of what was clearly a much larger conspiracy. I had to stay unconscious, had to keep playing dead while they revealed the full scope of their betrayal. The next morning brought Dr. Martinez for his rounds. I kept my breathing shallow, and even as he examined my incision site and checked my chart. "How long do you expect her to remain unconscious?" Joshua asked, and I caught the subtle eagerness in his voice that the doctor completely missed. "Could be another day or two. The extended anesthesia from the complications can affect recovery time significantly." Complications. Dr. Martinez was repeating the narrative that Rebecca had started, but something in his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by his own words. I wondered if Rebecca had spoken to him privately about her concerns. "Is there any chance of permanent effects?" Joshua pressed. "From gallbladder surgery? Highly unlikely. She should make a full recovery." I heard Joshua's sharp intake of breath, barely audible, but telling. He wasn't hoping for my recovery. He was disappointed by the doctor's optimistic prognosis. After Dr. Martinez left, Joshua made a phone call. I strained to hear every word as he stepped toward the window. "The doctor says she'll be fine. We need to move faster." "No, I can't wait another week. The bank is already asking questions about the loan application." Bank loan. My heart rate spiked, and I had to concentrate on keeping my breathing steady. What loan application? I hadn't applied for any loans, and our mortgage had been paid off when I inherited grandmother's house. The signature looked perfect. "Your guy did excellent work. Yes, I understand the risk, but we're committed now." Signature forgery. Professional document fraud. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision or a crime of passion. This was an organized scheme that involved multiple people, professional forgers, and had been planned for months, possibly years. Rebecca entered during his conversation, and Joshua quickly ended the call. She moved around my bed with the practiced efficiency I'd come to recognize, but I felt her pause at my wrist when she checked my pulse. "Your wife's heart rate is elevated," she told Joshua. "That's unusual for someone in her current state." "Is that dangerous?" "Not necessarily, but it suggests her body might be processing the medications differently than expected. I'll need to monitor her more closely." Rebecca was covering for me, creating medical reasons for the vital signs that betrayed my consciousness. She knew I was awake, and she was protecting me. "I should stay with her tonight," Joshua said, "in case something happens." "Actually, the ICU has strict overnight policies. Only one family member can stay, and we recommend patients rest without interruption. You should go home, get some sleep. She'll be monitored constantly." Rebecca was getting rid of him, giving me space to reveal myself if I chose to, but I wasn't ready, not yet. That evening, after Joshua reluctantly left, Rebecca approached my bed and spoke in a low whisper. "I know you can hear me. Your vitals give you away every time he talks about insurance or medical complications." She paused, adjusting my blanket. "I've been a nurse for 15 years. I've seen this before. Men who show more interest in prognosis than recovery, who ask about insurance procedures instead of treatment options." She moved closer, her voice barely audible. "I'm divorced. My ex-husband tried something similar when I was pregnant with my daughter, made me feel crazy, questioned my memory, isolated me from family. I recognize the signs." Another pause. "If you can hear me and if you need help, just squeeze my hand once tomorrow when he's here." The next morning brought Joshua early, coffee in hand, and dressed in his best suit. He looked like a grieving husband to anyone who didn't know better. But I noticed details now that I'd missed before. His wedding ring was loose, like he'd been taking it off frequently. His cologne was different, lighter, younger, probably chosen by Chelsea. Even his haircut was newer, styled differently than the conservative cut he'd worn throughout our marriage. "Any changes overnight?" he asked Rebecca. Her brain activity is showing more normal patterns. She could wake up any time. Could, not will. Medicine isn't an exact science, Mr. Martinez. Some patients recover quickly, others take longer. There's no way to predict with certainty. When Rebecca checked my pulse, I gave her the gentlest squeeze I could manage. Her fingers tightened slightly in acknowledgement, and I knew I had an ally. "I'll be right back," Rebecca told Joshua. "Hospital policy requires me to check on another patient, but I'll return in 10 minutes. The moment she left, Joshua's entire demeanor changed. He pulled his chair closer to my bed and leaned in. "I know this is hard to understand, but everything I'm doing is for the best. The house was just sitting there gaining equity we couldn't access. The loans will help us build something better." He was talking about himself and Chelsea, not himself and me. "Chelsea's been amazing through all of this. She's been taking care of everything while you've been sick. The house, the bills, even sorting through your grandmother's old things in the attic." My grandmother's belongings. Chelsea had been going through my family's personal possessions, deciding what had value and what could be discarded. The thought of that entitled stranger touching my grandmother's photos, her letters, her handmade quilts made my blood boil. "She found some interesting documents up there. Insurance policies, investment accounts you never mentioned. It's like you were keeping secrets from your own husband." He was twisting the narrative, making my privacy about family inheritance sound like deception. My grandmother had been careful with money, had saved and invested wisely, and had left me financial security that I'd kept separate from our joint accounts, not because I was hiding anything, but because it was my family's legacy earned through decades of hard work and sacrifice. "The baby's due in 4 months, little girl. Chelsea's already picked out a name, Emma Grace, after your grandmother, actually. She thought you'd appreciate that." Emma Grace. They were going to name their daughter after my grandmother while stealing everything she'd worked for. The calculated cruelty was breathtaking. Rebecca returned exactly when she'd promised, and Joshua immediately shifted back into concerned husband mode. Over the next 2 days, I perfected my unconscious act while gathering intelligence about the full scope of their betrayal. Chelsea visited daily, sometimes alone, sometimes with Joshua. When she was by herself, she revealed details that made my skin crawl. "I've been wearing your jewelry to prenatal appointments," she told my supposedly unconscious form. "That diamond tennis bracelet looks amazing with my maternity dresses. I'll probably keep it after everything's settled." She described sleeping in my bed, using my expensive skincare products, and rearranging my living room furniture to better accommodate her pregnancy needs. She talked about the nursery they were planning in what had been my home office, complete with a crib that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Joshua says you were always kind of boring anyway. Never wanted to travel, never wanted to try new restaurants. I'm going to make sure he experiences life properly. Boring because I'd worked 60 hours a week to maintain the comfortable lifestyle he enjoyed, because I'd chosen financial security over impulsive spending, because I'd valued our home and marriage over constant entertainment and novelty." The most devastating moment came on my 3rd day of conscious unconsciousness. Chelsea arrived wearing my grandmother's engagement ring, not my wedding band, but the antique ring my grandfather had saved for months to buy in 1952. I'd kept it in a safety deposit box, brought it out only for special occasions. "This one fits perfectly," she told Joshua, showing off the ring on her right hand. "Much prettier than her wedding set. More my style." "Save that for after," Joshua warned. "People might notice if you're wearing her jewelry now, but it looks so good on me, and it's not like she's using it." They'd been in my safety deposit box, had somehow gained access to family heirlooms that represented 60 years of love and commitment. My grandparents had worn those rings through the Depression, World War II, raising 5 children on factory wages, and celebrating their diamond anniversary just months before grandfather's death. "Once everything's finalized, you can wear whatever you want," Joshua assured her. "The house, the jewelry, the investments, it'll all be ours to do with as we please." As I lay there listening to them plan their future with my family's legacy, I realized that this wasn't just adultery or even theft. This was the systematic erasure of my entire existence, down to the most precious symbols of the love that had created my family line. They had no idea that every word was being cataloged by someone who'd spent 8 years investigating insurance fraud, someone who understood exactly how to document evidence and build an ironclad case. They thought they were planning the perfect crime, but they were actually confessing to someone who knew exactly how to make them pay for every single violation they'd committed against my family, my marriage, and my life. By my 4th morning in the hospital, I knew it was time to wake up. I'd gathered enough evidence to understand the scope of their betrayal, but I needed to be strategic about my emergence from unconsciousness. Too alert, and they'd suspect I'd overheard their conversations. Too confused, and they might see an opportunity to manipulate me further. I started with small movements, a finger twitch when Rebecca checked my pulse, a soft moan during her morning rounds. She caught on immediately, playing her part perfectly. "Mrs. Martinez, can you hear me? You're in the hospital, but you're safe now." I let my eyelids flutter, squinting against the fluorescent lights as if they were too bright. Joshua leaped up from his chair, suddenly the picture of devoted concern. "Sweetheart, thank goodness you're awake. I've been so worried." I focused on his face with deliberate confusion, letting my brow furrow as if I was struggling to place him. "Joshua, what? What happened to me?" "You had surgery, remember? Your gallbladder. There were some complications, but you're going to be fine." I touched my head gingerly, wincing. Everything feels foggy. I remember driving to the hospital, but after that, I trailed off, watching his expression shift from concern to something that looked suspiciously like relief. "That's normal after anesthesia complications," he said quickly. "The doctor said you might have some memory issues for a while." Memory issues that he was clearly counting on. I decided to test exactly how far he'd push this advantage. "How long have I been here?" 4 days. You've been unconscious the whole time." I nodded slowly, as if accepting this information. "Have you been here the whole time? You look tired." "I've barely left your side." He lied smoothly, though some friends have been helping out, bringing food, checking on the house. Friends, plural. I wondered how many people knew about Chelsea and how he'd explained her presence in our lives. Over the next few hours, I played my part carefully, confused about dates, uncertain about recent events, but gradually becoming more alert. I asked about work, about bills, about mundane details of our life together, watching him craft lies with practiced ease. "Your boss called," he said. "I explained about your condition. She's holding your position, but there's no pressure to return until you're completely recovered." My boss, Jennifer, would never hold a position indefinitely without medical documentation. I suspected Joshua hadn't called her at all, or had told her something entirely different about my condition. "What about money? If I'm not working?" "Don't worry about that right now. I've been handling everything. Insurance is covering the medical expenses, and I've taken care of the bills." Taking care of the bills with credit cards in my name from accounts he'd accessed without authorization. But I nodded gratefully, playing the role of the trusting wife who believed her husband was protecting her interests. Rebecca discharged me the next afternoon with strict instructions about follow-up appointments and physical therapy. As Joshua wheeled me to his car, I caught her eye and mouthed, "Thank you." She squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "Be careful." The drive home revealed more evidence of their deception. Joshua's car had a new baby seat in the back, not installed yet but clearly purchased recently. When I commented on it, he claimed it was for his sister's baby. Lisa asked me to pick it up since I was driving past the store. Lisa's youngest child was 12 years old. She hadn't needed a baby seat in over a decade. Our house looked the same from the outside, but the moment I walked through the front door, I could see the subtle changes. A pregnancy pillow on our couch, different shampoo in the bathroom. My grandmother's antique jewelry box had been moved from the bedroom dresser to the kitchen counter, as if someone had been going through it casually while cooking. "You should rest," Joshua said, guiding me toward the bedroom. "I'll make you some soup." I settled into bed, noting that the sheets smelled different. Not just clean, completely different fabric, softener, maybe even different sheets entirely. Chelsea's scent lingered faintly in the room that should have been my sanctuary. While Joshua busied himself in the kitchen, I carefully examined my nightstand. My prescription bottles had been moved, the book I'd been reading before surgery was gone, replaced with magazines I'd never purchased. Even my phone charger was different, newer, still in packaging. They'd been living here, not just visiting or staying occasionally, actually living in my house, sleeping in my bed, using my belongings as if they already owned them. Over dinner, I carefully probed for information about our finances. "I've been thinking about that vacation we talked about," I said, watching his reaction. "Maybe we could use some of the house equity for a nice trip once I'm feeling better." Joshua nearly choked on his soup. "Actually, sweetheart, We should probably be conservative with spending right now. Medical bills, time off work. It might be better to wait. Conservative with spending while he'd been charging thousands of dollars to our credit cards for baby supplies and his girlfriend's needs. What about my grandmother's investment account? I thought about using some of that money for home improvements. Investment account. He looked genuinely confused, which told me he hadn't found all of my financial assets yet, the ones she set up through her credit union. I think there's about $40,000 in bonds and certificates. His eyes widened slightly. $40,000 he didn't know about, couldn't access, and couldn't steal without my direct involvement. I don't remember you mentioning that before. Really? I could have sworn I told you about it. Maybe it's the memory issues from surgery. I was planting seeds of doubt about my mental state while simultaneously revealing assets he'd want to access. If I appeared confused and vulnerable, he might make mistakes in his eagerness to get control of money he hadn't known existed. That evening, while Joshua thought I was napping, I heard him on the phone in the kitchen. She's more confused than we hoped, asking about things that don't exist, forgetting conversations we never had. Yes, I think we can work with this. More confused than they hoped. This confirmed that my supposed memory problems were part of their plan, not an unfortunate complication they had to work around. The house equity loan went through. We'll have access to the funds by Friday. No, she signed everything before the surgery, remember? The confusion just makes it easier to explain if anyone asks questions later. House equity loan. They'd mortgaged my grandmother's house, the property that had been paid off for 5 years, my only real security in this marriage. They'd somehow forged my signature on loan documents and were treating the borrowed money as their personal windfall. Chelsea's been patient, but she's starting to show. We need to move faster. I know the risks, but we're committed now. Move faster toward what? My death? My disappearance? Or just my complete financial destruction? I'd heard enough. While Joshua finished his phone conversation, I quietly retrieved the business card Rebecca had slipped into my discharge papers. Sarah Chin, attorney at law, with a handwritten note on the back, specializes in financial abuse cases. Mention my name. The next morning, I told Joshua I had a physical therapy appointment at 10 o'clock a.m. Instead, I drove to Sarah Chen's office, ready to begin building the case that would expose every crime they'd committed and ensure that my grandmother's legacy would never fund the happiness of people who'd wished for my death. As I sat in the law office waiting room, I realized that their biggest mistake wasn't underestimating my consciousness during those hospital conversations. Their biggest mistake was assuming that someone who'd spent 8 years investigating insurance fraud wouldn't know exactly how to document evidence and build an unshakable case against people who thought they were smarter than the system. They taught me everything I needed to know about their crimes simply by discussing them in front of what they believed was my unconscious body. Now I was going to use their own words to destroy the future they'd been so carefully planning at my expense. Sarah Chen's office was nothing like the sterile corporate law firms I'd imagined. Her reception area felt warm, almost therapeutic, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs that didn't intimidate vulnerable clients. When she called me back to her office, I understood immediately why Rebecca had recommended her. "Before we begin," Sarah said, settling behind her desk with a yellow legal pad, "I need you to understand that what you're describing isn't just marital infidelity. Based on Rebecca's preliminary information, we're looking at multiple felonies. Are you prepared for the legal consequences your husband will face?" "He wished for my death in my hospital room," I replied quietly, while I was supposedly unconscious and helpless. "Yes, I'm prepared for whatever consequences follow." Sarah nodded, making notes. "Tell me everything, starting with the financial irregularities you've discovered." Over the next 2 hours, I detailed every conversation I'd overheard, every suspicious transaction I'd noticed, every lie Joshua had told about my condition. Sarah's expression grew more serious with each revelation. "The house equity loan is our strongest starting point," she explained. "If your signature was forged on those documents, that's identity theft and bank fraud. Do you have any samples of your actual signature for comparison? I have 8 years of joint tax returns, mortgage papers, insurance documents. My signature is consistent and distinctive." "Good. I'll need copies of everything. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan applications, medical records from your surgery. Can you access these without arousing suspicion?" That became my mission over the following weeks. Every afternoon when Joshua thought I was resting, I was actually conducting the most important investigation of my career. I photographed bank statements while he showered, copied credit card receipts from his wallet while he slept, and systematically documented every financial transaction that had occurred without my knowledge. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Joshua had opened 3 credit cards in my name, taken out 2 personal loans using my Social Security number, and had somehow accessed my retirement account to take a hardship withdrawal. The total theft exceeded $80,000. But the most damning evidence came from his text messages. During one of his longer absences, I used software I'd learned about in insurance fraud cases to recover deleted messages from his phone. The conversations with Chelsea revealed planning that went back over a year. She's so trusting she never checks the bank statements, read one message from 10 months ago. The life insurance policy is worth $250,000. House is worth at least $180 plus her retirement accounts, Chelsea had replied. We just need the right opportunity, something that looks accidental. My hands shook as I photographed these messages. They hadn't just been planning to steal from me. They'd been researching ways to make my death appear natural or accidental. My gallbladder surgery hadn't created their opportunity. It had simply accelerated plans they'd already made. The more evidence I gathered, the more I realized this needed to be more than just a divorce case. Joshua had manipulated everyone in our social circle, professional network, and extended family. His coworkers believed I was terminally ill. His mother thought I was mentally unstable and financially irresponsible. Our mutual friends had been told I was controlling and emotionally abusive. That's when I conceived the dinner party. I want to plan a recovery celebration, I told Joshua one evening, watching his face for any sign of panic. Something to thank everyone who supported us during my health crisis. Is that really necessary? You're still recovering, and big gatherings might be overwhelming. I feel ready to socialize again. Plus, I want to show everyone how much their kindness meant to me. Joshua couldn't object without seeming unsupportive, but I caught the worried look that crossed his features. He was calculating risks, wondering what I might say or do in front of witnesses. Who were you thinking of inviting? Everyone who sent flowers or cards, your CO workers who organized that meal train, your family, of course, our neighbors who checked on the house. Chelsea should definitely come. You mentioned how helpful she's been. The guest list I created was surgical in its precision. Every person Joshua had lied to about my condition, our marriage, or his relationship with Chelsea would be in the same room simultaneously. They'd all hear the truth at the same time, making it impossible for him to create different narratives for different audiences. While Joshua thought I was planning a simple dinner menu, I was actually creating a multimedia presentation that would expose every crime he'd committed. The slideshow started innocently enough. Wedding photos, vacation memories, family gatherings, but embedded throughout were screenshots of bank statements, copies of forged documents, and transcripts of the conversations I'd recorded during my hospital stay. Sarah helped me coordinate with Detective Maria Santos from the Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Santos had been tracking identity theft rings that targeted married women, particularly those with good credit and family assets. Your case fits a pattern we've been investigating, she explained during our meeting. Husbands who systematically destroy their wives' financial independence, often while the women are dealing with medical issues or family crises that make them vulnerable. Will the evidence I've gathered be admissible in court? The recorded conversations from your hospital room are legal. You were the injured party and had a reasonable expectation that medical discussions would be private. The financial documents are your own records, and the text message recovery was done on devices that were jointly owned. Your case is solid. We arranged for Detective Santos to be present at the dinner party, along with 2 other officers who would remain outside until needed. The timing had to be perfect. Enough evidence presented to make the crimes undeniable, but not so much that Joshua could claim entrapment or manipulation. Meanwhile, I was quietly securing my future. Rebecca's brother, David, turned out to be more than just a security consultant. He was a former police detective who specialized in protecting domestic abuse victims during dangerous transitions. He helped me open new bank accounts at a different financial institution, change passwords on all my personal accounts, and arrange for a locksmith to change every lock on my grandmother's house the moment Joshua left for our dinner party. The most dangerous time for women in situations like yours is when the abuser realizes they've lost control, David warned. We need to assume that once Joshua understands what's happening, he may become desperate or violent. David installed security cameras throughout the house, documented every valuable item, and helped me move my grandmother's most precious belongings to a secure storage unit. We also arranged for my important documents, birth certificate, social security card, passport, to be safely stored outside the house. "What about after the dinner?" David asked. "Where will you go once everything's out in the open?" I looked around my grandmother's living room at the furniture she'd saved for decades to buy, at the family photos that chronicled generations of strong women who'd survived much worse than unfaithful husbands. "I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly. "This is my house, bought with my family's hard work and left to me through my grandmother's careful planning. Joshua is the one who will be leaving." 3 weeks after my strategic awakening, everything was in place. The guest list was confirmed, the evidence presentation was prepared, and law enforcement was coordinated. Joshua thought he was attending a simple recovery celebration that would reinforce his image as a devoted husband who'd supported his wife through a medical crisis. Instead, he was walking into a carefully orchestrated revelation that would expose every lie he'd told, every crime he'd committed, and every person he'd manipulated during his systematic campaign to destroy my life and steal my family's legacy. As I sent out the final dinner invitations, I realized that Joshua's biggest mistake wasn't just underestimating my consciousness during those hospital conversations. His biggest mistake was assuming that someone who'd spent 8 years detecting insurance fraud wouldn't recognize the signs when she became the target of the most elaborate scam of her own life. The evening of the dinner, I arrived at Rosario's restaurant 2 hours before the guests were scheduled to appear. The same private dining room where Joshua had nervously fumbled with my grandmother's engagement ring 8 years ago, asking me to be his wife while promising to love and protect me forever. The irony wasn't lost on me that this room would now witness the destruction of every vow he'd made. The restaurant staff had been incredibly accommodating when I'd explained I wanted to create a multimedia presentation for my recovery celebration. They helped me position the projection screen where everyone would have a clear view, tested the sound system, and even provided technical support to ensure nothing would go wrong during the most important presentation of my life. "Mrs. Martinez, is there anything else you need?" asked Maria, the event coordinator who'd handled our anniversary dinners for the past 3 years. "Actually, there might be some emotional reactions during the presentation. If anyone needs to leave quickly, could you make sure the exits aren't blocked?" Maria looked puzzled but nodded professionally. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Everything will be perfect." Guests began arriving at 6:30, exactly as planned. I positioned myself near the entrance, greeting each person with genuine warmth and gratitude. Joshua's coworker, Tom, handed me a card signed by their entire department. "We're so glad you're feeling better," he said sincerely. "Josh was so worried about you. We all were. Thank you. Your support meant everything during my difficult time." Joshua's sister, Lisa, arrived with her husband, both of them giving me careful hugs as if I might still be fragile from my supposed ordeal. "You look wonderful," Lisa said, studying my face. "Much better than Joshua described. He made it sound like..." "Like what?" "Well, like you were much sicker than you appear to be." Joshua had been managing different narratives for different people, but the inconsistencies were starting to show. Megan arrived fashionably late, making her grand entrance with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the power in family dynamics. She kissed my cheek with the same false warmth I'd endured for 8 years, never suspecting that I'd heard every cruel word she'd whispered about my potential death. "You're looking surprisingly well, dear," she said, her tone carrying just enough surprise to sound backhanded. "Thank you, Megan. I'm feeling much stronger than anyone expected." Joshua and Chelsea arrived together at 7:15, and I watched the room's energy shift as people tried to place the pretty young woman who seemed so comfortable at Joshua's side. He introduced her smoothly to each group of guests. "This is Chelsea, a family friend who's been incredibly helpful during my wife's recovery. She's been taking care of so many things while I focused on the hospital visits." Family friend. The pregnant girlfriend carrying his child was being introduced as a helpful neighbor to people who sent sympathy cards and organized meal trains for what they believed was my terminal illness. "Chelsea, you're so kind to help out," said Margaret from across the street. "It must be difficult being so young and dealing with such a serious medical situation." "It's been challenging," Chelsea replied, her hand unconsciously moving to her still small bump, but Joshua needed support, and I wanted to do whatever I could. I watched this performance with fascination. Chelsea had perfected the role of the selfless family friend, while Joshua played the devoted husband bearing an impossible burden. Neither of them showed any guilt or discomfort lying to people who genuinely cared about my welfare. At 8 o'clock, I called everyone to attention. "I can't begin to express how grateful I am that you're all here tonight," I began, my voice carrying across the room. "The past few weeks have been the most challenging of my life, but your support, your kindness, and your love have meant everything to me." Murmurs of sympathy and encouragement rippled through the crowd. Joshua beamed at me from his seat, Chelsea beside him looking appropriately somber. "I've put together a small presentation, some photos and memories from the past 8 years. I thought it would be nice to share some happy moments after such a difficult time." The lights dimmed, and the first slide appeared on screen, our wedding photo, Joshua and me cutting the cake with radiant smiles. The audience made appreciative sounds, several people commenting on how young and happy we looked. I continued with vacation photos, holiday gatherings, anniversary celebrations. Joshua visibly relaxed, probably thinking this would be nothing more than a nostalgic tribute that reinforced his image as a loving husband. "Marriage isn't always easy," I said as photos of our early years filled the screen. "It requires trust, honesty, and commitment. It means protecting each other's interests and never taking advantage of vulnerability." More photos appeared, Joshua and me at family barbecues, birthday parties, quiet moments at home. His CO workers smiled knowingly, his family members nodded approvingly, and our neighbors whispered about what a devoted couple we'd always seemed to be. "But sometimes," I continued, my voice growing harder, "the person you trust most in the world turns out to be someone completely different than who you thought they were." The 15th slide changed everything. Bank statements filled the screen, showing unauthorized transactions highlighted in red. Credit card bills with charges for baby furniture, maternity clothes, and pregnancy-related expenses. The room fell completely silent as people leaned forward, trying to understand what they were seeing. "These are financial documents showing $80,000 stolen from my accounts while I was supposedly dying in the hospital," I said calmly. "Money used to fund a secret life with a pregnant girlfriend while my husband told all of you that I was terminally ill." Gasps erupted throughout the room. Joshua shot to his feet, his face flushing red. "This is insane. You're having some kind of breakdown. The surgery affected your mind?" "Sit down, Joshua." My voice was still. "We're not finished." The next slides showed text messages between Joshua and Chelsea discussing my life insurance policy, planning how to divide my assets, and calculating the value of my grandmother's house. Photo after photo of evidence I'd methodically collected over the past month. "You told your CO workers I was dying," I continued, looking directly at Tom and the others from Joshua's office. "You told our neighbors I was mentally unstable. You told your family I was financially irresponsible and controlling. Every single person in this room was lied to and manipulated to cover up an affair, identity theft, and fraud." Chelsea tried to stand, but I wasn't finished. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Chelsea Rodriguez, Joshua's pregnant girlfriend of over a year. She's been living in my house, sleeping in my bed, wearing my grandmother's jewelry, and spending money stolen from my accounts while you all sent sympathy cards for my supposed terminal illness." The room erupted in shocked conversations. Joshua's TO workers looked bewildered, his family members stared in horror, and our neighbors began putting together months of suspicious behavior they'd witnessed but hadn't understood. The final slide appeared on screen, containing just one sentence in large, bold letters. "Maybe she'll die and solve our problem," Megan Martinez said while I lay unconscious after surgery. Megan's face went white as 31 people turned to stare at her. Joshua looked like he might collapse as he realized I'd been conscious during that hospital room conversation. "I heard every word you said while you thought I was unconscious and helpless," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "Every cruel comment about my death being convenient, every discussion about dividing my assets, every lie you told these good people who genuinely cared about my welfare." Detective Santos chose that moment to enter the dining room, her badge clearly visible. Behind her came 2 uniformed officers. "Joshua Martinez, you're under arrest for identity theft, bank fraud, and forgery. Chelsea Rodriguez, you're under arrest as an accessory to financial crimes. As handcuffs clicked around Joshua's wrists in front of every person he'd deceived, I realized that justice sometimes requires the perfect audience to witness the perfect downfall of people who mistake kindness for weakness and trust for stupidity. The man who'd wished for my death to solve his problems had instead created the perfect solution to mine. The chaos in the restaurant dining room was immediate and electric. 31 people who'd been lied to for months erupted in overlapping conversations, their voices mixing with Joshua's protests and Chelsea's sobbing as the handcuffs clicked into place. Detective Santos maintained professional calm while reading them their rights, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes as she arrested 2 people who'd made the mistake of underestimating their victim. "This is a mistake," Joshua shouted over the din, his voice cracking with desperation. "She's mentally unstable. The surgery affected her brain. None of this is real." Tom from his office stood up slowly, his face pale with understanding. "You told us she was dying, Josh. We organized a meal train. We collected money for your family. She was sick. The complications were real." "But the complications were a lie," I said quietly, and the room fell silent again. "Dr. Martinez can confirm that my surgery was routine. No complications, no extended anesthesia, no memory issues. Everything you told these people was fabricated to cover up your crimes." Detective Santos finished with the arrests and turned to address the stunned crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to need statements from anyone who received false information about Mrs. Martinez's medical condition, financial situation, or family circumstances. Detective Rodriguez will coordinate with you for scheduling." As Joshua and Chelsea were led away, the room buzzed with shocked conversations. I watched Megan sink into her chair, her face ashen as she realized her cruel hospital comment had been the final nail in their coffin. Several neighbors approached me with apologetic expressions. "We should have known something was wrong," said Margaret. "Joshua kept saying you were too sick for visitors, but we could see you working in your garden just days before the surgery. Don't blame yourselves. He's very good at manipulation." Sarah Chin appeared at my elbow, having witnessed the entire confrontation from the back of the room. The timing was perfect. By morning, every asset will be protected, and they won't be able to access a single account or document. She was right. While Joshua and Chelsea sat in holding cells trying to process their new reality, a coordinated legal machine was dismantling their access to everything they'd stolen or planned to steal. Sarah had prepared injunctions freezing all joint accounts, emergency court orders protecting my grandmother's house from further encumbrance, and cease and desist notices preventing any additional use of my credit or identity. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything about the scope of the case. "Mrs. Martinez, this is Agent Patricia Flores with the FBI Financial Crimes Task Force. We've been monitoring your case through local law enforcement, and we'd like to discuss federal charges against your husband." Federal charges. What I thought was a personal betrayal had apparently caught the attention of investigators tracking much larger patterns of financial abuse. "Agent Flores, I'm not sure I understand. This seems like a local matter. Your husband's systematic approach to identity theft and financial abuse while you were medically vulnerable fits a profile we've been building. We believe he may have learned these techniques from others, possibly as part of a larger network that targets married women during medical crises." The implications were staggering. Joshua's crimes weren't just spontaneous greed. They might be part of an organized scheme that had victimized other women who hadn't been as fortunate or professionally equipped to fight back. Agent Flores arranged to meet me that afternoon, bringing files that made my blood run cold. Photos of other women, other forged documents, other cases where husbands had systematically destroyed their wives' financial security during vulnerable periods. "We've identified at least 12 similar cases in Arizona alone over the past 3 years," she explained. "The methodology is almost identical. Forge signatures during medical procedures, claim memory issues from anesthesia, gradually isolate the victim from financial control." "Are you saying Joshua was trained to do this?" "We're investigating connections between your husband and other perpetrators. Phone records show regular contact with men who've been convicted of similar crimes. We think there may be an informal network sharing techniques and potentially coordinating timing." This revelation transformed my case from personal revenge into something much larger. I wasn't just seeking justice for myself. I was potentially helping to expose a criminal network that had destroyed other families. Meanwhile, Chelsea's true character was emerging under legal pressure. Within 48 hours of her arrest, she'd hired her own attorney and was actively trying to distance herself from Joshua's crimes. My client was led to believe that Mrs. Martinez was terminally ill, her lawyer announced during a press conference. Ms. Rodriguez was told she was helping a grieving widower prepare for his wife's inevitable passing. She had no knowledge of any financial crimes. The audacity was breathtaking. Chelsea, who'd been living in my house and wearing my grandmother's jewelry, was claiming she'd been deceived about my health status. The same woman who discussed my life insurance policy in my supposedly unconscious presence was now portraying herself as an innocent victim of Joshua's manipulation. But her abandonment strategy backfired spectacularly when prosecutors offered her a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Joshua. The recordings I'd made during my conscious unconsciousness proved she'd been an active participant in discussing my assets and potential death, not an innocent bystander misled about my condition. Megan's damage control attempts were equally desperate and ineffective. She hired a lawyer and began claiming her hospital comment had been taken out of context and that she'd been joking about my death solving their problems. But Rebecca had witnessed the entire conversation and was prepared to testify about the callous, calculating way they discussed my potential demise as a convenient solution. Mrs. Martinez wasn't joking, Rebecca told the prosecutor during her deposition. She was strategizing. The whole conversation was about timing, about how medical complications would provide cover for their plans. 6 weeks after the dinner revelation, Joshua was facing federal charges for identity theft, bank fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The local charges included forgery, elder abuse, and attempted theft of property. The combined penalties could result in decades in federal prison. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Recorded conversations, documented financial transactions, witness testimony from hospital staff, and now federal investigation into his connections with other similar criminals. His defense attorney was already hinting at plea negotiations. "Your husband's case has become what we call a career-ending prosecution," Agent Flores explained. "The evidence is so comprehensive that fighting the charges would be professional suicide for any defense lawyer." As I sat in Sarah Chen's office reviewing the mountain of legal documents that would protect my future and ensure Joshua's conviction, I realized that his systematic betrayal had actually created the perfect evidence trail for his own destruction. His methodical approach to stealing my life had provided methodical evidence of every crime he'd committed. The man who'd planned my death as a convenient solution to his moral failures had instead engineered the most thorough and devastating legal consequences imaginable for himself and everyone who'd helped him. Justice wasn't just being served. It was being served with the same calculating precision he'd used to plan my destruction. Except, now I was the one controlling the outcome. The first time I walked back into my grandmother's house after Joshua's arrest, I stood in the doorway for nearly 10 minutes before I could force myself to cross the threshold. David waited patiently beside me, understanding without explanation that this moment required courage I wasn't sure I possessed. "Take your time," he said quietly. "There's no rush." But there was a rush, an urgent need to reclaim the space that had been violated by people who'd seen my potential death as a convenient solution to their greed. I stepped inside and immediately noticed the subtle wrongness that permeated every room. The furniture arrangements were different, pictures had been moved, and there was a lingering scent that didn't belong, Chelsea's perfume mixed with unfamiliar cleaning products. In the master bedroom, I discovered evidence that made my hands shake. The mattress was new, still bearing tags that showed a purchase date from 3 weeks ago. They'd replaced my grandmother's antique bed frame with something modern and cheap. Her handmade quilts were gone, probably sold or thrown away to make room for Chelsea's preferences. But as I searched through what remained of my belongings, I made discoveries that revealed the true scope of their theft. In a shoebox hidden behind winter coats, I found receipts from pawn shops and jewelry stores. Joshua had been systematically selling my grandmother's jewelry collection, pieces that had been in our family for generations, including her mother's cameo brooch and the pearl necklace my grandfather had given her for their 25th anniversary. "This receipt is from last month," I told David, holding up a slip of paper. "He sold my great-grandmother's wedding ring for $300. It was appraised at over $2,000. "We can recover some of these pieces through the restitution process," David assured me. "Pawn shops are required to hold items for specific periods, and with documentation of theft, we can force them to return family heirlooms." The kitchen revealed more painful evidence of their domestic life. Baby preparation books stacked on the counter, prenatal vitamins in the medicine cabinet, and a refrigerator covered with ultrasound photos and appointment reminders. They'd been building their future family in the home my grandmother had left me, using furniture she'd saved decades to buy and planning to raise their child in rooms where my family had created memories spanning 3 generations. But the most devastating discovery came when I opened my grandmother's cedar chest in the guest room. It was empty except for a single note in Joshua's handwriting: sold vintage linens for $100, antique baby clothes $200, photo albums garbage. Garbage. They'd thrown away irreplaceable family photographs, including pictures of my great-grandparents who'd immigrated from Mexico with nothing but hope and determination. Decades of carefully preserved memories gone because Chelsea needed room for her own belongings. I sat on the floor next to the empty cedar chest and cried for the first time since discovering their betrayal. Not tears of self-pity or heartbreak over Joshua's infidelity, but grief for the irreplaceable family history that had been carelessly destroyed by people who saw value only in immediate financial gain. David found me there 20 minutes later, handed me tissues without comment, and began helping me catalog everything that had been stolen, sold, or destroyed. His methodical approach reminded me that this wasn't just personal loss, it was evidence in an ongoing criminal case that would ensure Joshua paid for every single violation he'd committed. "The important thing is that you survived," he said as we documented the empty spaces where family heirlooms had once been displayed. "Everything else can be replaced, recovered, or rebuilt." Returning to work proved more challenging than I'd anticipated. My colleagues at the insurance company had received conflicting information about my health crisis from Joshua's carefully orchestrated deception campaign. Some believed I'd been terminally ill, others thought I'd suffered a mental breakdown, and a few had been told I was dealing with family financial problems that affected my stability and judgment. My supervisor, Jennifer, called me into her office during my first week back. "We need to discuss the inconsistencies in the information we received about your medical leave," she said, her expression concerned but professional. "Your husband contacted us multiple times with updates about your condition, but the details changed significantly between calls. What exactly did he tell you?" Jennifer consulted her notes. "Initially, he said you were having complications from routine surgery and would be out for a week. Then he called saying you were in ICU with life-threatening issues and might not return to work at all. A week later, he claimed you were stable but suffering memory loss and cognitive issues that could affect your ability to handle complex cases." Each lie had been calculated to manage different aspects of his scheme. The life-threatening complications justified his need for emotional support from CO workers. The cognitive issues provided cover for any financial documents I might question later. The extended timeline gave him more opportunity to commit fraud while I was supposedly incapacitated. "I have medical records proving that none of those complications occurred," I told Jennifer. "My surgery was routine, my recovery was normal, and I was never in ICU. My husband was conducting an elaborate fraud scheme that required explaining my absence from normal activities." Jennifer's expression shifted from concern to amazement as I explained the basic facts of the case. By the time I finished, she was shaking her head in disbelief. "You documented all of this while pretending to be unconscious. That's investigative work beyond anything we do here." Word of my case spread quickly through the office, and instead of the sympathy or suspicion I'd expected, I found myself receiving respect and recognition from colleagues who were impressed by my methodical approach to evidence gathering. The senior partners began consulting me on complex fraud cases, particularly those involving financial abuse of vulnerable adults. "Your experience gives you insights that most investigators lack," explained Robert Chin, Sarah's husband and a fraud specialist at our company. "You understand the victim's perspective while maintaining professional objectivity about the criminal methodology." Within 3 months, I'd been promoted to senior fraud investigator with a focus on domestic financial crimes. My salary increased substantially, my professional reputation was stronger than ever, and I was invited to speak at industry conferences about detecting and preventing spousal financial abuse. The legal settlement from Joshua's crimes exceeded my expectations. The restitution included not just the $80,000 he'd stolen, but additional damages for emotional distress, the cost of recovering stolen property, and penalties for violating consumer protection laws. Combined with the recovery of assets he'd hidden and the insurance payouts from proven fraud, I found myself in the strongest financial position of my adult life. More importantly, I now understood exactly where every dollar of my money was located, how each account functioned, and what legal protections existed to prevent future abuse. The financial literacy I'd gained from investigating my own case had transformed me from someone who trusted blindly into someone who verified everything. But the most valuable part of my recovery came through working with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a therapist who specialized in betrayal, trauma, and financial abuse. Our sessions helped me understand that Joshua's systematic deception wasn't a reflection of my worth as a wife or my judgment as a person. Sophisticated financial abusers target women who are trustworthy, successful, and financially stable, Dr. Rodriguez explained. Your trust wasn't weakness. It was the very quality that made you an attractive target for someone who specialized in exploiting good people. Learning to trust my instincts again required practice and patience. David's friendship provided a safe space to redevelop confidence in my ability to judge character and recognize genuine kindness. His consistent honesty, respect for my independence, and complete lack of interest in my financial situation proved that trustworthy people still existed. Recovery isn't about becoming suspicious of everyone, Dr. Rodriguez taught me. It's about developing discernment, the ability to distinguish between people who deserve trust and people who exploit it. As I sat in my grandmother's restored living room 6 months after Joshua's arrest, surrounded by recovered family heirlooms and new memories I was creating, I realized that his betrayal had ultimately set me free from a marriage built on lies and given me the opportunity to discover strengths I'd never known I possessed. The woman who'd lain unconscious and vulnerable in that hospital bed had been reborn as someone who would never again allow anyone to mistake her kindness for weakness or her trust for stupidity. The morning of Joshua's sentencing hearing arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharper, more defined. I dressed carefully in my grandmother's navy blue suit, the one she'd worn to important occasions, altered to fit me perfectly. It felt appropriate to have her strength with me as I witnessed the final chapter of Joshua's legal reckoning. David offered to accompany me, but this was something I needed to do alone. As I walked up the courthouse steps, I spotted a familiar figure hunched on a bench near the entrance. Joshua sat with his shoulders curved inward, wearing an ill-fitting suit that hung loose on his diminished frame. 6 months in county jail awaiting sentencing had transformed him from the confident man who'd wished for my death into someone who looked defeated by consequences he'd never imagined facing. He looked up as I approached, and I saw recognition flicker across his features. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I studied the man I'd been married to for 8 years, searching for any trace of the person I'd once loved. What I saw instead was someone who'd gambled everything on my destruction and lost completely. "You look well," he said finally, his voice strained from months of legal stress. "I am well. Better than I've been in years, actually." Joshua shifted uncomfortably on the bench, glancing toward the courthouse entrance where his court-appointed attorney was probably waiting. "I know you probably can't forgive me," he began, his words coming out in a rush. "But I need you to know that I never meant for it to go this far. The pregnancy wasn't planned, and when Chelsea told me about the baby, I panicked. I made terrible decisions, but I never wanted to hurt you." The apology was everything I'd expected. Self-serving, incomplete, and focused more on his emotional state than the damage he'd inflicted. I let him finish before responding. "I heard every word you said while I was unconscious. Every single word." His face crumpled as the full weight of that statement hit him. The hospital conversations where he discussed my life insurance payouts, the casual way he'd planned to divide my assets, the cruel calculation behind every lie he told about my health. He was realizing that I'd been conscious for all of it. "You heard?" he whispered. "Your mother wishing for my death to solve your problems. Chelsea discussing how my grandmother's jewelry looked better on her than on me. Your phone calls about forged signatures and memory loss that would make me easier to manipulate. All of it." Joshua buried his face in his hands. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not anger, but a strange kind of peace. The man who'd systematically planned my destruction was finally understanding the scope of what his cruelty had cost him. "The baby," he said suddenly, looking up with desperate eyes. "Emma Grace is beautiful. She has your grandmother's eyes." The audacity of naming his daughter after my grandmother while stealing everything she'd left me was breathtaking, but I realized it no longer had the power to wound me. "How is Chelsea managing?" I asked, genuinely curious about the young woman who'd been so confident about replacing me. "She's struggling, living with her parents, working at a restaurant, and cleaning offices at night. The baby has colic, cries constantly. Her parents help, but they're not happy about the situation." Chelsea's fairy tale had collided with reality. The entitled young woman who'd worn my clothes and slept in my bed was discovering that single motherhood while supporting a convicted felon wasn't the romantic adventure she'd imagined. "She doesn't visit you?" Joshua shook his head, shame coloring his features. "She can't afford the time off work, and her parents forbade her from bringing Emma to jail. They said they won't let their granddaughter be exposed to this environment." "What about your mother?" "Mom's been—" He paused, struggling with the words. "She had to leave her church. People were talking, saying terrible things about her, wishing you were dead. Her friends won't speak to her anymore. She moved to Phoenix to live with my aunt, but even family gatherings are awkward now." Megan's cruel whisper had destroyed more than just her relationship with me. It had made her a pariah in the community where she'd lived for 40 years. The woman who'd thought my death would solve their problems had created problems that would follow her for the rest of her life. A bailiff appeared at the courthouse entrance and called Joshua's name. His sentencing hearing was about to begin. "Will you be there?" he asked as he stood, adjusting the jacket that no longer fit properly. "Yes, I have victim impact testimony to deliver." He nodded, accepting this as part of the consequences he'd earned. As he walked toward the courthouse entrance, I felt the weight of 8 years of marriage finally lifting from my shoulders. The man disappearing through those doors was a stranger who'd worn Joshua's face while systematically planning my destruction. Inside the courtroom, I took my seat in the front row and watched as the legal process that had consumed months of my life reached its conclusion. The prosecutor outlined the charges: identity theft, bank fraud, forgery, elder abuse, conspiracy, each count representing a deliberate choice Joshua had made to prioritize his own desires over my safety and financial security. When called to deliver my victim impact statement, I stood and faced the judge with the same confidence I'd developed during 8 years of investigating insurance fraud. "Your Honor, the defendant didn't just steal money or forge signatures. He systematically planned to erase my existence, steal my family's legacy, and build his new life on the foundation of my destruction. While I lay unconscious after surgery, he brought his pregnant girlfriend to my hospital room and discussed my potential death as a convenient solution to his moral failures." I spoke for 10 minutes, detailing not just the financial crimes but the emotional manipulation, the lies told to friends and family, and the calculated way he'd used my trust and vulnerability against me. When I finished, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of Joshua's quiet sobbing. Judge Patricia Martinez, no relation to Joshua despite the shared surname, delivered a sentence that reflected the seriousness of his crimes: 8 years in federal prison, full restitution of all stolen funds plus damages, and 5 years of supervised probation upon release. He would serve his time at a federal facility 3 hours away, ensuring that Chelsea's visits would be expensive and difficult, even if she chose to maintain their relationship. As the bailiff led Joshua away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't expected. The man who'd planned my death as a solution to his problems had instead engineered the complete destruction of his own life and future. Walking out of that courthouse, I realized that Joshua's betrayal had been the catalyst for the most important discoveries of my adult life. I'd learned that I was stronger, smarter, and more resilient than I'd ever imagined. My grandmother's house was truly mine again. My financial future was secure, and I had a clear understanding of my own worth that no one could manipulate or destroy. The woman who'd lain unconscious in that hospital bed, listening to people discuss her death as a convenient solution, had been transformed into someone who would never again allow anyone to mistake her kindness for weakness or her trust for stupidity. Justice had been served, but more importantly, I had been served the opportunity to rebuild my life on a foundation of truth, strength, and self-respect that would protect me for whatever challenges lay ahead.